Hello, and welcome to another installment of the AAIS webinar series. I'm John Caduce, Vice President and Head of Products at AAIS. Today, we'll be looking at how leading mutual insurers leverage analytics to improve performance with our longtime associate partner, BriteCore, and a panel of industry experts. So let's get started. I'm happy to introduce your moderator for today's discussion. BriteCore's Chief Marketing Officer, Amity Hungerford, brings more than 2 decades of experience driving growth and innovation strategies across the B2B enterprise software and financial services market. Amity, I'm happy to hand over the reins to you to introduce your panel.
Hey, thanks, John. Hello, everyone. As John mentioned, I lead marketing at BriteCore, and I'm based here in Dallas, Texas for today's session. BriteCore is a cloud-native insurance platform for P&C insurers. We're trusted by over 90 insurers across North America and growing fast. We enable these small to mid-sized carriers and MGAs to efficiently manage their insurance operations and compete effectively with the largest providers. And leading marketing at BriteCore, I often work closely with our customers to tell their stories of success. And in that spirit, let me introduce you to 2 of our insurance carrier panelists. I will get right into it. Alex Gann is the CIO of Farmers Fire Mutual Insurance, and Scott Page is the Vice President over at Cameron Mutual. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Great being here.
All right. Just to get started, the topic for today is really how leading mutual insurers leverage analytics to improve performance. And having worked with you both, I know quite a bit about what your company journey has been and your personal journey has been. But maybe it was a way to get introduced and open up the discussion. We could have you provide a brief overview of your company. So Scott, maybe you can go first, and then Alex.
Sure. First of all, my name is Scott Page, and as Amity said, I am responsible for project management and data architecture, data visualization at Cameron Mutual Insurance. Cameron Mutual has been around since 1892, initially founded to help farmers mitigate their risks against tornadoes and windstorms, basically. In the 131 years since, we've grown to write business in personal lines, commercial lines, and farm lines in the states of Missouri, Iowa, and Arkansas. We're headquartered out of Cameron, Missouri, which is about an hour north of Kansas City. So if I look giddy and disoriented, it's because we're still celebrating the Super Bowl here in Cameron, and we plan to for another year or so.
Fantastic. That was a great game. You like seeing it close like that all the way up to the very end. Alex, maybe over to you.
Well, yeah, so my name is Alex Gann, CEO at Farmers Fire. We're a single state writer in Pennsylvania, so we're not celebrating big game. That's quite as much. No, but we're established, Farmers Fire was established in 1853. We write homeowners, dwelling fire, commercial package. We're currently 17 full-time heads, definitely right in that small, mid level, 22 million DWP. We use AAIS. About 50% of our premium is AAIS based forms and products. And so we love, AAIS, and we're just like Cameron on the BriteCore platform. And so happy to be here sharing that. And I've been with Farmers Fire for, just a decade now, just hit 10 years. So just happy to be here for sure.
Fantastic. Well, we've established we're not talking about the Super Bowl today, but we are going to talk about analytics. And so I thought it would be great. Maybe Alex, you could kick things off and share your company's journey with leveraging analytics and reporting to improve performance over at your business.
Sure, absolutely. So, before I joined Farmers Fire, I was actually led up a data warehousing and business intelligence team at an international defense contractor. So I went from where my team, my one management structure up through, 70,000 employees. My one team was, larger than the company I then went to join at Farmers Fire. So big shift from a large structure to a much smaller one. But when I got to Farmers Fire, we were on, a legacy platform, IBM iSeries. Maybe some of our participants still are familiar with that platform. And so there were reports that came out of that system but they were, a lot of work, a lot of programming, pre-formatted reports. And so one of the very first things I did when I joined the company was develop a SQL interface into that backend so that we could really start mining that data, looking for insights. And so we did that for a series of about 3 to 4 years. And then that's when we knew for sure we wanted to migrate to a policy admin system that was more modern. And after a year-long search, we found BriteCore, and we've been happy ever since. We've been on for 6 years, and we just continued that journey into BriteCore, leveraging as the reporting analytics features have grown in that system. And so we'll get more into, I think, details later on about some specific reports and things that we've leveraged. But so we started off, crawl, walk, run, basic performance metrics, obviously meeting all of our obligations to reporting to third parties and things. But as we went, we certainly have had some interesting insights that I'll be happy to share probably later in the webinar.
Super. Scott, maybe do the same, share your journey around this space.
Okay, sure. Cameron Mutual has a in-house research and development organization. So for some time, many years, we've conducted what would be considered to be data analytics. But about 4 years ago, we really focused on overcoming 3 major obstacles that we had with respect to data insights. The first one is that we had a ton of data, but it was everywhere. We had, some of it was over here and some of it was over here. We had, we're in the midst of our BriteCore implementation today. And as it sits today, we have 3 insurance administration systems, lines of business in each of those systems. And so to create a holistic view of the state of the ship was very difficult and required a lot of human effort to do that. The second obstacle that we had was the methods by which we were disseminating data insights today, or at that time, largely were through reports and spreadsheets, and that probably sounds familiar to a lot of people. And a lot of it was email spreadsheets to each other. And so we would encounter these situations where we weren't always all working off of the same set of data, because you had to make sure you had the right version of the spreadsheet. And who has that spreadsheet if I don't have it? I need to reach out and find those people. So we needed to create a central method of accessing that data so we were all working off the same set and it could be accessed at any point in time. And then the third obstacle, that was a pretty big one, and that was that our research and development organization, as they would conduct actuarial analysis, God bless them, they worked really hard to get the data, to assemble the set of data that they were going to research against before they even started. So the effort to do actuarial analysis was nearly insurmountable in essence. So our goal at that point in time was to solve those 3 problems. And so really starting during the summer of 2019, we started to evaluate business intelligence tools that would allow us to, at the very least, solve the first 2 problems, even if we solved the third one separately. And over the course of about 6 months, we zeroed in on Amazon QuickSight as the technology we would use for those visualizations. And what that allowed us to do was to build visualizations that provided those holistic views. I could see the written premium. I could see our total written premium across all of our lines of business, independent of where that data was maintained initially. I mentioned we had 3 insurance administration systems. The user of our dashboards didn't have to care where that data sat. They were able to view it holistically within those dashboards. Additionally, because we agreed that we were going to do that visualization through Amazon QuickSight, it was available. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a cloud-based system accessible through an internet browser. And so the people who needed those data insights at that time could go to the same place at any time. We were all working off the same set of data. It was accessible to us at all times. We didn't have to ask. We didn't have to track down spreadsheets or reports in order to be able to do that. The third problem, we zeroed in on using Snowflake, which is a cloud-based sort of next generation data repository utility that allowed us then to assemble all of that data in a self-updating central structure so that our actuarial analysts going forward no longer had to worry about the construction of the data set. They were able to access a self-updating, constantly updating data set from which all they had to do was their research as opposed to worrying about the construction of that data. And that's kind of where we sit today.
Very cool. I mean, that is an incredible journey. I mean, you have really moved across a wide range of technologies there, and you know, when I hear both of you speak about the space, I hear even, you know, we talk about analytics, reporting, and dashboards. I think it's probably good terminology wise that we don't jumble them all together. And Alex, it would, I think, be helpful if you could just share with the group your view of the differences between these terms, why they're essential, and who might typically use them.
Sure. Yeah, that's an absolutely great question. You know, when I think of reports, and certainly this is kind of our view at Farmers Fire, and this is what we use, and so it might differ a little between people, but you know, when I'm thinking of reports, I'm thinking of formatted, pre-formatted data. It's defined, it's used in presentations, it's static and distributed. You know, it's something that I heard Scott mention about, you know, that world of distributing the data and then what version do you have? So a lot of times a report, you know, it's a static artifact that's developed at one time and put out at one time. You know, a lot of people might use reports, you know, third-party integrations, if you're sending data off to a reinsurer or to, you know, obviously when you're doing your financial statements, I mean, that certainly classifies as a report. If you're doing a quarterly board member presentation, you're going to have reports. So you know what the data is ahead of time, you've defined the format. And certainly thinking back, you know, and maybe some people still live this life, a lot of legacy systems really only did reports. And there was even software whose job it was to take a pre-formatted text laid out field and pull data out of it so that you could almost reverse engineer reports back into data sets. And I think that's an interesting segue, an important segue into the next term, which is analytics. So when we think of analytics, we think then instead of static, dynamic, right? Instead of already known, pre-formatted, it's discovery. You know, we're talking interactive with the analytics, you know, pivot tables. You know, you might be doing this in a spreadsheet, but when you're doing analytics, you know, you're analyzing. You have questions and you're looking for answers from the data versus the report kind of already knew the question and answered it. An analytics exercise would be something that you're really diving in and trying to learn something new, gather new key insights that maybe you didn't have before. And one other thing I think of when I think of analytics, I think of code. I think of you know, SQL statements and tooling and maybe a little higher skill threshold. I think that might change over time as you know, things like, you know, AI tool assistants, you know, come through and you can do things like ask your spreadsheet, you know, tool assistant to write formulas for you. And I think that's coming. But analytics kind of does traditionally, I think, lie more in the realm of you've got a specialist at your company or at a vendor that's helping you with that. And then so finally, dashboards, I think kind of is an intersection of those two. It kind of gives you a little bit of the best of both worlds. Typically, you're not writing code for a dashboard, but you do have a data set of dynamic fields that you can pull from to build out your vision. It's both formatted, so you have charts and graphs and preset sorts, but it's also dynamic. You can drill into it. You can, you know, modify filters. You're doing both discovery and presentation. So dashboards kind of, I think, works towards a best of both worlds. Certainly in the end, wherever you are on that journey, all three continue to have a place. You're still going to be using reports for those third parties, for some of your operators in your company, for producing those formatted things. Analytics, you're still going to need to be diving in and learning more about the data that's in your system and not just letting it lay there, you know, quietly, you know, not harvesting the value from it. And then dashboards, again, gives you a place where you, if your system's configured right, and as you know, Scott's done the work for his company, we've done it at Farmers Fire, a well-done dashboard can really allow you to still discover new insights from week to week, month to month, but also can be familiar, and it's not always a science fair project and a new effort to jump in and understand. So I think that's, at least at Farmers Fire, kind of how we think of the delineation between those three, and I hope that's helpful.
That is. I'll tell you, of course, being a marketer, I always try to distill things down to a simple way of looking at things and explaining. And I've always thought of it as reports tell us what's happened in the past. Dashboards visually bring information to life and keep us informed on what's happening now, like what is happening. And analytics help us understand why something is happening or has happened. And so we'll talk about all these things because all of them have a role, and they won't, and all three will be there forever. But it's how do you tap that latent value of the data that you have in your systems. And so with that spirit, I guess, Scott, as an insurer, what are the more important business metrics that you tend to look at when you're thinking about presenting it in these different forms? What are the metrics that you kind of hone in on and are using as important metrics?
Yeah, as you can imagine, we measure a ton of stuff. The thing that we tend to focus on, we build in our dashboards, we build a single sheet view where we measure about 4 or 5 things. And, there's written premium, and we may slice and dice that based on individual lines of business, et cetera. There's new business written premium, there is retention, and then there's loss ratio. And we focus very heavily on those, and in setting goals and pursuing those goals for those dimensions. So at the beginning of the year, each year, for example, we'll sit down and say, for written premium, we may say for farm lines, for example, our goal is to have this much written premium at the end of the year. And then our dashboard, because it's updated, allows us to, at least on a monthly basis, look at our progress towards those goals. We know, I'm going to use some round numbers here. We know that if we want $120,000 worth of written premium for a particular line of business over the course of the year, that we need to have roughly $10,000 per month in order to be able to maintain that. So at the end of January, we can see where are we at against that goal. Are we on track to be able to get to that goal? And we disseminate that state of the ship, that view, to every person in the company. Everybody is looking at that, so that we don't get to the end of the year and announce to everybody, hey, great, we made it, or even worse, hey, we didn't quite make our goals, at the point in time where there's nothing that those people can do about them. So we allow those individual organizations then to set cascading goals. How can I contribute to, and I in the IT department, or I in the underwriting department, how can I contribute to being successful against those goals? So we measure a ton of stuff, but that's one of the most poignant measurements that we use. And then to leverage some of Alex's terminology and introduce a slightly new one, our dashboards also enable self-serve analytics, so that if we look at that and say, for farm lines, we're not quite there, why? Let's go look at why. We have the ability through those visualizations, without having to be a specialist, without having to write code, or the ability to go see where we're lacking and where we can improve.
Excellent. Maybe Alex, you could build off of that. Any comments or thoughts on the key metrics that you're thinking about over at Farmers Fire?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we've got some of the things I think that we've gotten a lot of leverage out of that we've built, have to do with, Scott mentioned retention, looking at, the policy movement, our in-force policy movement. And this was something initially from like our legacy systems. I mean, we would have that, we would see, okay, well, how much new business by agency, by line, how much cancellations. But then one of the things we did, on a policy count basis, that matters, and that's good to see. With premium, there's a couple other steps there. So, you can endorse a policy and add 8 locations. So some people might put that in new business, but there's a little bit of a different flavor to that, right? Okay, why are they endorsing that versus that a new policy? Same thing, you can endorse things off. You've got your terminations, but then they also reinstate back in. And that churn then becomes a bit of an interesting agency neediness metric, if you will. So we have a combination metric that basically is, for our agency base, we work with around 400 agencies in the state of Pennsylvania, and that's broken out to over 1,500 different actual agent producers at those companies. It's a lot of people to maintain and keep track of. And so, how much of our time are these folks taking up? You get a lot of 80-20 rules or 90-10 rules. 90% of your new business is coming from 10% of your agents, vice versa. A lot of the people that might be taking up a lot of your time maybe aren't actually the ones driving a lot of your new business. So those are some interesting insights we've been able to see by aggregating things like, non-pay counts or again, cancellations and reinstatements. And then the last kind of key insight was that, you can watch your premium then. So you've got your policies and your premiums on that policy life cycle. And one of the things that happens there is your policy net count, might net, a little bit of growth. Maybe you grew 3%, 4% policy count. But then your premium, if you've done new rates, let's say you've issued new rates for some of your product lines throughout the year. And so one of the things we have is that we break out and we're able to see how much of our premium increase is due to new business versus rate that we took on existing business. And so, and then how does that rate increase then correlate to maybe reduced retention or increased attrition rates within our policy base? So those are just some, just focusing on policy movement, kind of growth, maintenance, some of the things that we've looked at historically that have been interesting for us for sure.
Well, I've had the benefit of seeing some of the analytics and dashboards that you've been using BriteCore to light up your data, and I've seen terms that you use in your dashboards around sleeping giants, rising stars. Maybe tell the folks on the line here, how do you what those terms mean, why you look at this, what insight are you looking to gain when you create a dashboard with that type of title?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So that's right. So BriteCore, is rolling out to all customers kind of a standard set, and it's nice that while each carrier might have and certainly has dynamic attributes that are specific to them, there are also certain things about running an insurance company that really is standard across the board. Whether you're on BriteCore or not on BriteCore, whether you're with AAIS or a different rating bureau, it doesn't matter. And so one of those things is just truly agency, production and agency loss performance. And so rising stars and sleeping giants, yes, very interesting terms. We like them. And so the idea is that, as I mentioned, we've got 400 different agencies, 1,500 agents, 17 people in the company, right? Of those 17 people, we have 3 dedicated to agent marketing, and not all of them are even full-time. So we've got a situation where you've got not a lot of people and yet a lot of relationships to manage. And one of the things that could happen there is, for a long time, it was a manual go search and find and who's next on my call list. And one of the things that BriteCore has brought out with these is the idea of automatically raising to the surface cohorts of your agents that might be falling into certain exception cases that require a touch point. And so the idea of rising stars is you've got an agent that's not currently large with you. A lot of carriers on this call probably have contingent commission programs of certain sizes that say, all right, if you're this big of an agent with us, you've got this much book with us, and you meet these loss thresholds and you meet these growth thresholds, you'll get an extra kick at the end of the year, almost like a profit share from the company. A lot of carriers, I see Scott nodding his head. And a lot of times those smaller agents, you might have a new appointment that's really on fire and really growing quick, but they're not yet even at that threshold. And they go completely under the radar. And you don't want to be letting this person or people at these agencies working their butts off and not getting that pat on the back and that recognition. And so, it's, who are these? What are they placing with us? Also, while they're rising stars, it's important, to also keep that eye of that loss ratio metric that's right there next to it. Hey, we're getting a lot of good business with this. This is great. Are they rolling a book from another carrier that maybe didn't have the loss performance? So, what comes through the quoting channels might look like one thing from an underwriting standpoint. And if you don't see that side by side, you just want to make sure it's characterized. And then same with sleeping giants. It's completely different cohort. It's almost the other side of that coin. These are your larger agencies, relatively. It's not necessarily your top 10 largest, but relatively larger agencies, yet they've kind of gone to sleep at the wheel on you. And then the question becomes, okay, in the past, we've seen this agent can generate this percent on their book or this number of new business submissions across these policy types. And what have they done in the last month, quarter, year? Well, they're really lagging. Okay, it's time to go reach out to them. What's going on here? Is it us or is it you? Who else has come and knocked on your door recently? How can we sweeten the deal? Are we missing a product offering? Is this coming from your customers, or do you have another mouth to feed? So, when you're working with independent agents and they've got appointments with, 5, 8, 20 carriers other than you, where are you falling in that stack? And so having a system that is automatically highlighting these cohorts to us without us having to spend any time on it. You don't even have to, it's like a gift that's just there for you. So that's been a really interesting and really exciting kind of new development that's coming out of BriteCore that we've appreciated.
Very cool. Yeah. There's a wide range of reports and dashboards that can be created. I'm curious, Scott, over at Cameron, you've done a lot in this area. I'm sure you've taken them from a world of manual to somewhat automated, maybe completely. And maybe talk about that. What wide range of reports and dashboards are you delivering there within Cameron?
A ton, as I mentioned before, and I'll sort of piggyback on some of Alex's comments about various cohorts. We don't have the imaginary terms, I think, that Alex has turned out for his measurements. We simply call them leaderboards, which is very boring, but hopefully productive. He mentioned, for example, that you may have individual incentive programs. So a profit sharing bonus, a president's award, or in our case, we'll also have targeted time boxed incentives where over the course of the next 4 months, we're going to have a contest for written premium for uploads around business owners policies, for example. Yep. And we'll build leaderboards that will show a individual agency's position. If it's a top 10 thing, it'll show where they fall in the top 10, why they're outside of the top 10. If it's a particular bonus that as many people who meet a threshold can make, will also show tendencies towards the threshold. Are they on track for the threshold right at this point in time of the year? If they're not, why not? If some of those things are based on both written premium and loss ratio, for example, it may show that they're not making it and identify to the viewer of the leaderboard that they're making it in written premium, but their loss ratio is too high to be there. Right. And making these very easily consumable to the people who need to disseminate that information, particularly marketing representatives or underwriters or whomever might be working most directly with the agencies. Making that as easily consumable and clear as possible without having to dig for it a lot is something that we care a great deal about. And we spend a lot of time on. Some of those other cohorts we like, we dislike monoline policies. So as much as we can get both the homeowners and the personal auto policy for a particular insured, we would like to do that. So we use heat maps, for example, to identify agencies where we have a lot of monoline policies so that marketing reps and underwriters can spend time with them and try to see at the very least why we're not getting both of those policies and what we can do to improve that. So there are various cohorts to that, and there are a number of others, and depending on the amount of time we have, I can get into some of the ones that are ancillary to core business but incredibly important, like what we do with our agent satisfaction surveys, like what we do with tracking costs of the use of our system. We, for example, track the cost of using Amazon QuickSight in Amazon QuickSight, so we visualize those costs and have been able to identify extraneous unexpected costs that we were able to eliminate through those visualizations as well. So I can get into some of that, but I want to turn it back over.
No, really cool. So I also want to just open to the audience, let everyone know within the next 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes, we'll open up for Q&A. So as we're going through this panel discussion, be sure to think about what questions you have and enter them into the chat area, and then you'll be in a position for us to answer your question as we open things up a little bit later in the call. Hey, Alex, we've had a real interesting discussion, you and I, around this concept of operational versus strategic reports and analytics. Maybe you can share your perspective on that and how you view this entire space. And I think it's beneficial for the wider audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, just a brief segue off of Scott's point before I jump into operational versus strategic. Agent incentives are really fun to track. And so at any carrier, we've found that, for everyone on the call here on the webinar, we've done thermometers. You filling up the thermometer, how close are you getting? And we tried different cycles, and we've A/B tested, from one quarter to the next, different promotions, tried to look at the seasonality of things and make sure that we're not just misreading. But it seems that gift cards are highly favorable. And so just premium threshold gift cards has been a strong motivator for our agency.
Great motivator.
You've got an agent already on a new business and renewal commission that's identical, and yet you toss a little extra sweetener in the form of an emailed Amazon or Visa gift card with each new submission. You get that. I'm not waiting for month end for that commission to come through. It's just, if I hit submit, that gift card's in my inbox. It's been pretty instrumental in incentivizing behavior that we like. So
Yes.
it's an interesting segue there. But no, operational versus strategic reporting, I think, is definitely a key thing to keep in mind. And it's a key thing to keep in mind, both when you're working with your vendor, or if you have an in-house system or you're working with your IT team. Obviously, Scott and I both are more on the IT side of the business, but I think we both, have been in the space long enough to understand a lot of the business side as well. And we don't just have our IT brains on all the time. But on the operational side, you've got certain reports, certain extracts, as I mentioned before, that, really they are day-to-day business drivers. You've got exception reports that need to come out that someone might need to take an action on if you haven't, managed to automate certain processes yet, because, some processes, you've got your high-hanging fruit and your low-hanging fruit. And so, if you've got an item that happens a lot and is consuming a lot of a person's time, that might be something to look at, outsourcing and automating, one or the other. But if you've got an item that only comes up, a couple times a month, it's the benefit of automating that process might be, too far, but you still need to see when these exceptions occur. So maybe certain payment returns, NSFs that are occurring, is not, necessarily high enough volume from a policyholder payment standpoint. And yet, you can't just let them fly under the radar. They need to be operationally present for you. So when you're looking at those operational reports, and those can be presented in a dashboard format, but I think a lot of times you really want those to be push-based to the user when they occur. And if they are going to be in a dashboard format, I would envision a dashboard where, and certainly we have reports like this in, we basically have a company intranet. As Scott described, Farmers Fire went down that same path of, we have legacy system, we have data since we went on BriteCore. We have a place where both of those data sets meet and are both presented to users. And so through that interface, that's a place where we've been able to do things like, have reports that, when they come up empty, there's nothing to be done. But when they have results, you take action. So that's some of those operational reports versus a strategic report. Really, Scott already mentioned about setting goals. There's a really great book, Measure What Matters. And so, looking at, how Google and different companies have used, OKRs, KPI, basically setting goals and working towards it. And so I think if you're working in your insurance company right now, and, we've mentioned it a couple of times now, but I think there's this, undercurrent of value that's running through your system. And, we've heard, if you've, heard anything through the last couple of years and even decade now, data is the new oil and all this. And, so you've got these big tech folks that have this realization that, data is value. But if that data is trapped in your system or locked in an interface that you can't get to, or your only way is to, here's your 7 parameters, here's your fixed format report, run it through Monarch and try to pull, the fields back out that you need. These are situations that some of us find ourselves in. And if you are in that situation, I would recommend sitting down with your management and board and start looking at what modernization options are out there for you. Or can you get better access to that data? Because once you set a strategic objective, there's things that you might need to dive into to get better answers on how to meet that. And so, along those lines, AMD, I'd say, one of the most impactful analyses that we did, and we've done a lot, Scott and I both have talked a lot about agency management, new business production, maintaining the health of growth. The other big side, if you've got two big sides of what carriers are looking at, is that loss performance. How is your book performing? You need growth, but you need profitable growth, sustainable growth. Your underwriting rules and your underwriters are first line of defense. Your agent is hopefully a line of defense even in front of that. Your inspection program is maybe a follow-up line of defense after that. But outside of all those things, you still have all that data running underneath. And if a policy cancels for non-payment and your accountant gets the call and the agent has the sad story about the insured and says, and the accountant, we all have big hearts. We all care. We all want our customers to be happy. We don't want to upset anyone. But at the same time, we're responsible for all of our policyholders. We're accountable to all of them. And so if it just so happens that that policy that just had a non-pay cancellation has had multiple non-pays in the past, has had multiple claims in the past, and sometimes there's correlations between these things. And we've run the numbers on it to see, interesting loss correlations between customer preferences and customer behaviors and customer history, and then the outcoming loss that might develop from it. And so you don't want to end up in a situation as a carrier where you have to raise rates across an entire risk pool to make up for the fact that maybe you weren't able to effectively underwrite or work with keeping your book as healthy as possible.
Right.
And so I think that's that point where, do you have an action point? Do you have a point for that accountant to go to split second where they can know the answer on that policy and they can be informed to say, what decision do I want to make on this without having to go on hold or jump on an underwriter's desk and say, hey, what do you think? And then they're scrambling to look. The better, and so we built, tools and reports around developing kind of a policy metric, a policy scoring threshold that can inform underwriting decisions in real time when they show up. Because that non-payment cancellation is an opportunity for any carrier when the contract is broken, when the policy is being canceled, where, state to state, it's different. But for the most part, that is a valid cancellation event that there's no other question about it. And that's a great opportunity to potentially avoid a large loss that, again, you're trying to protect all of your policyholders. And so you want to have a heart for everyone, but you also want to, be mindful about, how does this impact my 95% of my policyholders that will never have a claim?
Right.
So that's an important insight that we've been working on is that loss performance by different risk attributes beyond traditional underwriting attributes that you might expect.
Very good. Very insightful. So I see a question that comes through our Q&A panel from Jeff, who asks, how do these improved data tools contribute to efficiently meeting regulatory compliance requirements? Scott, or you want to take the first stab at that one?
So, and I will say that through the dashboards that we've developed in Amazon QuickSight, we are not using those to directly contribute any sort of output to regulatory organizations. We do during audits, for example, are able to show that we are maintaining data insights, that we are making good decisions based off of those, and that perspective. But currently, we don't do it through the dashboards. We certainly do regulatory submissions through a reporting approach.
Right.
Our dashboards, we're not using that today.
Yeah, and I'll take a shot at that one too. Jeff, I think MCAS comes to mind market conduct, annual survey. Certainly, if we're licensed in New York has DFS cybersecurity data surveys. On regulatory compliance standpoint, that MCAS really stands out because it's a very technical report. There's very specific definitions. There's training modules that they put up that go through. This is how we want you to count a claim. If you've paid a claim and then the claim you close it, and then it reopens later for an additional payment, that time to close is a separate claim open and close event, and count that as another event. So there's all these very specific rules, hopefully that, your vendor has already kind of sorted through or worked through. If not, that's something that definitely, most vendors and most carriers are going to want to really have a good handle on that. And to me, that falls squarely in, again, more that report space. I'm not analyzing this data. Interestingly, the state, your state commissioner is looking at that data. They want to see what's going on from a market conduct standpoint. You don't have claims sitting open too long. Your paid claim to not paid claim ratio isn't out of sorts. Your cancellation behaviors, you're giving your customers sufficient time according to the regulations, 30 days in this policy type, 60 days for this policy type. So the data there, especially, if you've got a monthly payment plan customer that likes to play the game of non-paying and getting a 30-day and then paying 2 days before their cancellation date, and they want to do that 5 times or 6 times in a policy term, getting that data out of the system for that type of regular reporting, it's not the easiest thing to do. And so I think there's some grace from folks like, on the MCAS side. They want to make sure you're getting it right, but it's definitely something that you want to be partnered with. If it's an in-house system, your IT team, if you've got a vendor system, with that vendor, to make sure that you can provide that data accurately and efficiently. And one of the nice things, though, is that it is one of those reports that truly, once solved, it's pretty well solved. They don't greatly change the questions on it from year to year. Maybe there's one new question that pops up once every couple of years. And so it's one of those ones. And so, we do the same thing. AAIS sponsoring this call. There's AAIS premium submissions. There's stat reporting submissions for carriers who are reporting back their premium and loss statistics to help inform actuarial data for the rates from AAIS. So yes, absolutely. Those are all things that, I think fall firmly in that report side of reports, analytics, and dashboards. And it's, I think, just as important. In fact, again, in that crawl, walk, run, there's certain things you must provide, and that's one of them. And so those are the must-haves. So definitely for all the people on the call, hopefully, I think everyone probably has those must-haves checked pretty firmly. If you're not comfortable, or if it's a huge effort every year, that's something that you'd want to be looking at solving, because you want that to be something that just happens with very low effort. Even though it only happens once a year, if you let it be a pain point every year, you can end up really sacrificing time to that and not moving on to, again, the analytics where you're asking questions that help you perform better as a business, or your dashboards that are giving informed insights automatically to you. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, this is really good because it gets to how we started the whole webinar around terminology. Reports really help you with that regulatory compliance requirement. The analytics and dashboards can help you with the audit process. I have another question that just came through from David, who's asking about dashboards, and it's really about who within the organization has access to the various dashboards. Is training provided on how they work, what info is available, how they might be best used? Alex, maybe you could jump on that one first and provide a perspective.
Absolutely. So, for each system is going to be different. For BriteCore in particular, dashboards are still in an early access phase. They're rolling out. But the way we've configured it at Farmers Fire as an early access customer who's committed to provide feedback back to BriteCore as they're released, is that we really try to target the dashboards by persona, by role in the company. So as Scott mentioned, there are some dashboards that are valuable to everyone. Our monthly financial statement and the data behind that gets published for all employees. We're all stakeholders in it. We're a company that does a profit share in good years. Everyone from wherever you are in the company stack should know how you're working towards those trends. And same thing's true with our agents on their commissions and how they're working towards their contingent goals. We want that data available to them. We project out linearly into the future. We don't want it to project out too far. So usually those are things we're really looking at a nice balance where you still have enough time to take action if you're close, but there's not so much uncertainty there. But yeah, other than that, on the dashboards, and the persona-based rollout, that's the main thing that we see. So if you're in accounting, you've got dashboards around payments and payment exceptions. You've got dashboards around agent commissions, policyholder non-pay statuses, the kind of things that you're going to be getting questions about, and the things that your volume of these types of transactions matter. For underwriting, it's underwriting queues, new business coming in, things that are waiting for review, submitted applications, how long, aging submitted applications. You certainly don't want to, have agents, upset that, they're looking for a quote if you don't have straight through processing on a line that maybe requires a little more customization on a per quote basis or per risk, which certainly on commercial package in particular, with 200 different classes plus the AAIS has provided, base loss costs for. I mean, it's an amazing rating program, and you can really just get out there and rate just about anything that comes down your path. But there's also then you want to look at that situation and leverage things like IRPMs to individual risk premium modifiers to get that quote just right where the agent's going to like it. So those dashboards help, from an underwriting standpoint, make sure those things are moving both operationally and at a manager level. And then lastly, we do have kind of executive pointed dashboards, things that are geared towards CFO or CEO that are really looking at top level company wide operational objectives, as Scott mentioned. So that's how they're rolled out. They're on a permissions basis. And in BriteCore, at least, there's also agency rollout versions for anything you want out there for them. So you can choose how much to show and give to agency principal level or agent level versus, just not. And, maybe it's something you want to give some time and digest internally and make sure you really are comfortable with what the data shows. Because then when you put it on the agency side, it just automatically restricts to that agent's agencies. And what's nice about that is you might have agents that have multiple offices. And instead of a legacy system, which maybe would make them log out and log back in multiple times to manage, BriteCore does an auto solving of all the agencies that agent's a member of if you've configured them properly in the contacts module, which allows that one agent to really have a one-stop shop of seeing, here's how all my offices are producing. And we have a lot of agents, it's like right up and down, this main route in Pennsylvania, they've got 12 agents, agency offices, and they track them all individually, but they also track them all at an aggregate. And being able to have a single dashboard for that agency principal to really get in there and understand, and yet have maybe staff at their companies that only see a couple offices that they're, licensed to produce from is really nice. So yeah, that's basically the permissions framework that BriteCore has gone with, and I think it's a really good one.
Very good. I have another question that came through the Q&A module, and it asks, what's the level of effort required to standardize data elements in order to contribute legacy sources into a shared repository in order to be able to use in your dashboards? I think, Scott, this is probably right up your alley. You probably know this from great experience. Maybe you can comment.
Well, I won't lie, and it is not without its burdens. It can vary based on the number of legacy systems you have, and we've seemingly maximized the number of legacy systems we can have. Ultimately, our problem will solve itself a bit as we move completely into BriteCore and it becomes a single source. The good part is the concepts that you're pulling from each, or at least in our case, the concepts are common. We're looking for written premium from each of those sources of data. So the establishment of the modification of what comes out of that so that it provides a uniform concept is not terrible. It's tough to, in direct response to your question, it's tough to equate the effort. I will say it's not simple, but the good part is if you do it as we've done it, you do that effort once as opposed to every time you want to collect that data. And then you're leveraging that effort in an from an automated perspective in an ongoing basis, and letting, making the data work for you as opposed to you working for the data.
Very good. Alex, would you comment on any of that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for Farmers Fire, it was a little different. We had 1 year where we had a leg in both systems, Legacy and BriteCore. So we rolled over 1 year, all lines. But to facilitate that year, we definitely didn't want our company staff or our agents having to go to 2 different systems to see and to have to concatenate. So we did, just as Scott described, you first need to start with that definition of what fields are needed. So one of the things I would say in terms of level of effort is one of the harder things to do is start with a 70% or 80% baked idea from the business side of what they want to see. And then you build that and you pull in those fields and you do the ETL, the extract, translate, load, and you've got your schema ready from both systems. You've done that one-time effort. And then you hear a month or 2 later, oh, you know what? It'd be really nice if it had this field too, or if it was also broken out on this dimension. Because especially for Farmers Fire, because we got over in that 1 year, our legacy data became a static database. It's a static crystallized data set that no new records get inserted into it. And so it's really nice. You can do a 10, 15 year analysis, now almost 20-year analysis on our data for those fields that we've ETL'd. And certainly within the first 4 months, I mean, we went through that where it was done. And then management looked at it and said, you know what? We need this extra breakout. And so you do a bit of a reset. The framework's still in place. The path to get the data from A to B and how it needs to be is still in place. But you end up, in some cases you're not just adding a column, you're really rebuilding that data set. You're running the job again to rebuild and pull and aggregate the data at the new level that's being asked for. And so the lower grain you can get up front, if it makes sense, that's one approach. But then at the same time, you don't want to go the whole way to the nth degree and get your data at the lowest grain and lowest, maybe not even common denominator. It's not even a common between your systems, but you're just going to try to pull it in anyway. You might spend a lot of time trying to make that work, only to find out that 80% of those fields never get looked at. And so I think the best thing I would recommend is, if you do have multiple systems, spend that effort really thinking and dreaming about, what do we need in the end? What does this end result need to look like? And make sure you ask the question and ask it a couple times, maybe give it a couple meetings so that they can sleep on it a couple nights. Are you sure we don't need something else? Are you sure there's nothing missing? And because you really don't want to go back and replay that effort 3-4 times, multiple quarters or years in a row, it's ideal, as Scott mentioned, they got it done once, they got the key metrics they knew they needed to see to manage the business. And now, even though they're still working on a migration path and there's new records coming into their other systems, it doesn't stop them from being able to really easily get those updates every month. So that would be my main advice.
That's great. Good answers on both parts. So we're here in the final stretch. I thought we would wrap up with if you could both just provide your final advice on what advice you'd give our webinar attendees to get started today and tapping that latent value of the data through analytics reports and dashboards. Maybe Scott, you could start, and then have Alex, we'll have you wrap up.
Okay. I think the initial steps are fundamental. The first step is particularly fundamental and tantamount to success, in my opinion. That is to agree as a leadership group that data is valuable and necessary, that measuring is necessary. And while that sounds like a slam dunk, there are probably plenty of people on this call that will say that it is not. There are a number of things that make people reluctant to do that, including, quite possibly, the possibility that they are afraid of what they're going to see if they start measuring it, that it's not going to be particularly pretty. And I would argue that that's the point in time where you most need to measure. The second step to that really is to kind of agree how you're going to measure. I mentioned that, we decided that we all needed to be looking at the same set of data, as opposed to what is a very real possibility, which is you've got multiple people measuring the same concepts, and in the worst case scenario, not coming up with the same answers. Not everybody having the same view of your current situation. And then I think the third one is start small. Don't try to become all solutions to all problems to all people all at the same time. You'll simply trying to boil the ocean will put you in a situation where you're paralyzed just trying to figure out where to start. So pick a few key performance indicators, 3, 4, 5. Start to build out common measurements of those, track them, set goals, cascade those goals so that everybody knows how they can contribute to that success and go. You can always iterate after that, build more KPIs, build functionality to allow you to dive into why the KPIs are the way they are, but start off small. Don't get out over your skis.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. And Alex, your perspective on advice for our attendees today?
Yeah, I think Scott's advice is really, really good. All 3 points are fantastic. It's and there's something to be said to, if you have leadership that's been in the industry for a long time, where they have a sense of, gut feel, they have a sense of what agents like and don't like. And then if you present data, and then but it's an important pushback as well, because, correlation doesn't always equal causation. And so just because your data might be saying one thing doesn't mean you necessarily can go and roll out, especially for us smaller mid-tier carriers, relationships probably a big part of how we all, I think we probably, at least if there's more carriers like us on the call, which I think there are, looking at the names, I recognize a few of them, relationships and that underwriting flexibility, that being a home for someone and is essential. And so that's one thing is, just on that note that Scott had about, convincing that the data is worth looking at, it absolutely is. You do need to see where your sore points are. All of a sudden, if you've got agent feedback, he talked about agent surveys and, promoter score and things, it's like, do we have data that backs this up, and then that we can set a target on, and then we can improve on this, like quote turnaround time or, claim turnaround time, those kind of items. So that would be one mention. And then the other thing I would just say, kind of closing off, is just, for those that are either on BriteCore or other system, other vendor systems, just make sure, make sure there's a plan in place. And if you don't feel like those things are being met, make sure you're reaching out and knowing what the plan is, so that you can be working towards that with your vendor or with your internal IT if you're not on a vendor system.
Agreed. Very good. Alex, Scott, just really enjoyed the conversation, the chance to chat with you both about this important topic. We're going to turn it back over to John to wrap us up and close out today's event.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Amity. And that was a terrific discussion. And thanks also to Scott and Alex for the terrific insights and advice as well.